Don't miss this year's Commercial UAV Expo in Las Vegas on September 3rd to the 5th. This is the premier event for the commercial drone industry, focusing on the integration and operation of commercial UAS and showcasing drones in action. Register now at expouav.com and use code SAVE100 for a $100 discount.
The construction company then hired a generic contractor in Utah, and that contractor in Utah hired a local pilot in Daytona Beach. Now you're starting to see the events unfolding, right? The FAA is issuing a COA that defines how to fly. And now you have 2 degrees of separation between the pilot who is going to execute the mission and the person who received that COA in the construction company.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 427. How can the drone industry get better at preventing midair collisions? For that question, we head to Boca Raton, Florida, to speak with Juan Plaza, CEO of Plaza Aerospace. Plaza Aerospace is a consulting company specializing in crewed and uncrewed aviation, Latin American business development, and GIS consulting. The company helps organizations reach their goals faster by selecting the right platforms and implementing the best deployment practices. Prior to forming Plaza Aerospace in 2015, Juan spent more than 26 years as a sales director for companies such as Autodesk and Trimble Navigation, mostly in Latin America, where he developed a network of software and hardware distributors willing and eager to represent new products in their respective countries. Juan has more than 750 hours of experience in photogrammetry navigation and camera operation in various aircraft, and holds a commercial multi-engine pilot certificate. On December 30th, 2023, a helicopter and a drone collided in midair in the vicinity of the Daytona Beach International Airport. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Juan talks about that midair collision and its relevancy for the drone industry and drone operators. But before we hear from Juan, I want to stress that your support is the heartbeat of my podcast. Every episode is crafted with you in mind, and your generous donations ensure I can keep delivering the content you love. Whether it's the price of a coffee or a more substantial contribution, every bit helps to defray the cost of production. Donate today and be a vital part of the podcast's continued journey to greatness. And for a limited time, donate $100 or more and receive an official Drone Radio Show coffee mug. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And if you can, please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform and leave a nice review and rating on iTunes. It really helps improve the podcast ranking among the many thousands of active podcasts today. And by the way, if you have a great story on the use of drones that you'd like to share in a podcast, contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's find out how midair collisions can be prevented with Juan Plaza of Plaza Aerospace. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Juan to introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Juan Plaza, and I'm the CEO of Plaza Aerospace.
Juan, tell us about Plaza Aerospace. What does the company do?
We are an aviation consulting company. We have 2 practices. One is uncrewed aviation. The other one is crewed aviation. I'm a commercial pilot. So I fly, I help people buy and sell planes. But I also like to write about drones. I write for about 4 or 5 publications worldwide in 2 languages. And we help companies with markets, like Latin American companies penetrate the US market, and American companies go to Latin America and so on. So everything to do with aviation, crewed or uncrewed.
Who are your main type of customers or clients?
There are a lot of companies in Latin America trying to penetrate the American market. They don't understand the level of regulation, and vice versa. American companies that are having a hard time making a profit or revenue in the US because of all the regulation. I opened the door. I have created a network of 26 distributors in Latin America that are eager to represent new products, software, drones, you name it, right? So through this network of distributors, we introduce them to new products coming from the US, and they go from there. They start creating revenue streams, outside of the US.
Juan, on December 30th, 2023, a helicopter and a drone collided in midair in the vicinity of the Daytona Beach International Airport. The FAA initially classified the accident as a collision with an object or terrain, but it was only after you contacted the FAA on behalf of the pilot did the real facts of the collision become known. Can you describe what happened?
What happened is that a helicopter and a drone collided in midair half a mile southwest of the Daytona Beach International Airport. That is the headline, December 30, 2023. Immediately, we jump to conclusions, right? Immediately, we start making assumptions. First, what is a drone flying close to an airport, right? First thing you assume is the drone is doing something wrong. Second, the helicopter, when you hear helicopter and airport, you assume that those things are linked, right? The helicopter was operating from the airport, and either one was flying too low or the other one was flying too high. But, when you find out what happened, none of those three are true. First, the drone was perfectly legal. Second, the helicopter was not operating from the airport. And three, the accident happened at another 180 feet above ground level, which is quite low. So what happened is that 2 things happened in reality. 4 days later, after the accident, I was contacted by the drone pilot who saw my website and called me. He was desperate. He was terrified because he was being, interrogated by the FAA, the NTSB, the local police, and everybody seems to assume that it was his fault, right? And the next day that he contacted me, the Alaska Airlines plug blew up and in a 737.
Why are those things related?
Well, first, I started getting all the details from the drone pilot of what happened. And at the same time, the NTSB got completely distracted by this event that is affecting millions of people around the world. The 737 is the most used aircraft in the world, right? So anything that affects the safety of a 737 is paramount. Imagine comparing that to an incident between a helicopter and a drone in which there were no casualties, no injuries, no major damage. It fell completely off the radar screen of the seasoned personnel at the NTSB.
Can you give us some insights on what the drone did as well as the helicopter?
What happened in this case is that the drone was performing a perfectly legal photogrammetry mission over a construction site, half a mile southwest of the Daytona Beach Airport. The construction company asked the FAA for a certificate of authorization or waiver. We're going to call it COA. So the COA was issued to the construction company. The construction company then hired a generic contractor in Utah And that contractor in Utah hired a local pilot in Daytona Beach. Now you're starting to see the events unfolding, right? The FAA is issuing a COA that defines how to fly. And now you have 2 degrees of separation between the pilot who is going to execute the mission and the person who received that COA in the construction company.
Did the pilot receive the specifications of the COA?
The pilot arrived at the site. DJI has something called geofence that inhibits the flight near airports. So he asked his employer, this company in Utah, for a copy of the COA. And then he scanned the COA and submitted it to DJI for the overriding of the. So now you have 4 actors, right? The construction company, the generic contractor in Utah, the drone pilot, and DJI. 4 of them have access to the COA. Okay? The thing is, the COA specified 2 things very clearly. Do not fly over 150 feet and call the tower of Daytona Beach International Airport 15 minutes before commencing operation. And at the end, when you're finished, call and say, did you finish? In the meantime, the generation of the COA generating what we call a NOTAM, notification to pilots. And that NOTAM created an area around the construction site from the surface to 200 feet, right? So that NOTAM told every pilot approaching or departing Daytona Beach International Airport that he was not supposed to be flying below 200 feet in that area. So when you're approaching an airport, as a commercial pilot, I can tell you, when you start talking about the approach, you start your descent from 35,000 feet or something, you read the NOTAMs. Antennas, taxiway so-and-so is out of service. But in that specific day, on that specific airport, there was a NOTAM saying there is a UAV activity southwest of the airport. So the NOTAM was there. Unfortunately, Randy, nobody read the COA. Nobody. It's incredible, but nobody noticed that the pilot was supposed to be flying at 150 feet. Unfortunately for him, he also didn't read the COA. So he was flying at 180 feet. So 30 feet above. Now, because the accident happened at 180 feet, that means the helicopter was also 20 feet below the NOTAM ceiling.
Was the helicopter pilot aware of the NOTAM?
This mission that the pilot was performing is called a construction follow-up. You fly the same mission every week. You go with the drone and you fly exactly the same mission. It's an autonomous flight. So the aircraft takes off, flies a grid, returns to ground, and you process that information. So the construction company knows exactly what happened that week, right? The pilot had performed 8 previous flights without incident. In fact, I plotted the flights of the helicopter, which is public information, together with the flights of the drone, and they were in the same airspace 6 times. There was no collision until the day of the accident, but they were in the same airspace up in the air 6 times before the day of the accident. So, I'm collecting all this information. And one day on the 25th of January, 5 days before the 1-month anniversary of the accident, boom, the NTSB releases the final report. Final report, not preliminary, final. And I blew a gasket, Randy, because this thing was so full of errors and omissions. It was offensive. It was incredibly inaccurate. First, they said that the cause of the accident was a collision with object terrain. Then, when they talk about cause of the accident, is the lack of knowledge of operations of the pilot of the other aircraft. And I said, what other aircraft? You just call it terrain, right? So in an accident between two aircraft, you have to list both aircraft, brand, model, serial number, FAA registration, a number of things, right? Then you have to list all the characteristics of the pilot, age, gender, license, certifications, medical, and so on. And then you say, okay, we think that this accident happened for the following reasons. And normally you clarify, or the NTSB clarifies, they were operating on the what part? Part 135 is charter, part 121 is American Airlines and all the other airlines, part 91 is private planes, and so on. Well, they mentioned everything, all of that for the helicopter as nothing for the drone. And I thought, oh my God, these guys think that the drone was illegal, right? So I couldn't sleep that night. And at 2:45 in the morning, I woke up and I jumped out of bed. I said, no, I have to correct this. So I wrote a 6-page report with all my graphs and that I've been working with the drone pilot. And I submitted it to the two people that signed the report, one NTSB inspector and one FAA collaborator or cooperating agent. I don't remember how they call it. And I told them, first, this is not object terrain. This is a mid-air collision. Second, if you're going to mention part 91 for the helicopter, you need to mention part 107 for the drone. Second, if you're going to mention all the details of the helicopter, you need to mention that the drone was a legally registered aircraft with the FAA. You need to say brand, serial number, model, and FAA registration number. If you're going to mention everything for the pilot, you need to mention everything for the drone pilot. Certificates, in this case, when it expires, because the license for drone pilots, Part 107, expires every 24 months, which is not the case for crewed aviation. And also, I said, blaming the drone pilot only is a mistake because the helicopter was flying 20 feet below the NOTAM.
So what happened?
Well, 3 days later, the report disappears from the NTSB website. It's unpublished. And on the 15th of February, I received a call from a person from the NTSB thanking me for the report. And she was very gracious because she said, Mr. Plaza, we had no idea how to conduct an investigation between a helicopter and a legal drone. We have conducted many investigations with illegal drones, and they're very easy. But in this case, when you wrote to us, we said, yes, these are both legally registered aircraft, and we need to acknowledge that fact. And I told her, listen, the reason why it's so important is because it's creating a precedent. You guys are creating a precedent. This is the way these accidents are going to be investigated from now on. So you need to recognize that it was a legal plane and a legal pilot who made a mistake, which is very different from an illegal drone flown by someone without a license.
How did the FAA respond?
5 days later, on February 20, they re-released the report, and it's completely different. First of all, they call it a mid-air collision. So they accepted the fact that there were two legally registered aircraft. They were having a hard time calling the drone an aircraft. And I think a victory for our industry is the fact that they did. The NTSB called the drone an aircraft. Then they said it was operating under Part 107. Great victory, too, because now we have an aircraft Part 91 colliding with an aircraft Part 107. Then they listed all the details of the drone, including the FAA registration number. And then they included all the details of the pilot. And now, in what I call the blame section, which before it mentioned only the drone pilot. Now it mentioned both pilots, saying that both lacked knowledge of procedures for the area at the time of the accident. And I can tell you, my experience with the drone pilot is he was called to the FAA FISDO, what we call the FISDO, the regional offices, for an interview, and they wanted to know if he was qualified to continue having a license. They subjected him to a series of questions. He was given 30 days to show himself for this interview, which I call an examination, if you want. And he passed. He was given his license back. I don't know what happened to the helicopter. Like I said, I'm not given access to any information from on that side, but I have to assume that it's the same because the guy clearly didn't read the COAs. So both pilots at the end, I think, were reprimanded by the authorities. And I don't think they lost their licenses, but I think this is a more of a reprimand than a suspension of license.
So what are the lessons that we can take from this experience?
We take for granted when we climb on board an aircraft, and it's our life inside the aircraft, we look more carefully at things. And I think there's a tendency when you're not inside the aircraft to take these things lightly. You're flying a drone. If it crashes, nothing is going to happen to me. And that Cavalerian attitude is very, very dangerous because if something happened in a crash with passengers and somebody dies, your life will change dramatically. So I would love everyone involved in this industry to be extremely careful, especially when you're flying under waivers or COAs. Read those things carefully and obey to the last point, because if the drone pilot would have been at 150 feet and he had made the call to the tower, he will be clean, right? But he didn't. So in this case, there were no injuries. But imagine that helicopter crashing in 95 and killing people on the ground. I mean, the nightmare scenario that can evolve from this innocent incident is incredible. So is it worth it for what they paying this drone pilot for one flight? Is it worth risking? So, I urge everyone to please pay attention to when flying your drone for hire or for pleasure. Be very careful with crewed aircraft because the consequences can be catastrophic for you, your family, your profession. And the good lesson that we learn is that now the NTSB and the FAA are aware. From now on, they will have to be very careful. If the drone is illegal, it's one thing, but it's legal. It has to be recognized as a legally registered aircraft with the FAA.
In this case, both the helicopter pilot and the drone pilot share responsibility for the accident.
There is a third actor that I would like to mention. The COA has a name, first name, last name, designated as the person responsible for the safety of operations under this COA. And that person is an employee of the construction company. That person never approached the pilot, who, remember, he doesn't know who he is because it's through a third party. I would also say, for lessons learned, that the person that is named with first and last name in an FAA COA should make sure that he or she brief whoever is going to fly that mission thoroughly, because it's his or her behind in the document. So that person, I have to assume, was also called to attention, say, why didn't you talk to this pilot? Why didn't you make sure? It's the equivalent of the chief of operations of an airline, right?
What's your message to the drone industry based on this experience?
The more you separate the drone pilot from the company that is responsible for the flight, the more risk we have, because you can easily imagine that the money that the construction company is paying this generic contractor in Utah is not the same money that is being paid to the drone pilot. So every time you put an intermediary, a piece of the action is left behind, right? So the amount of money that they were paying the pilot at the end is ridiculous. And I told him, how can you risk your entire future for that amount of money? This is ridiculous. So my concern is these generic contractors that hire people on the phone are creating a level of lack of safety that concerns me. Because imagine the pilot was an employee of the construction company, right? So 0 degrees of separation between the COA and the pilot. I can assure you that both employees of the company would have talked about it and would have made sure that the COA was followed. But there was zero communication. I mean, formal aviation briefing and debriefing of the mission, none. And that scares me because, every time I take off on a commercial flight, we have a briefing. We know exactly the route. We know how much fuel we have. We spend more time preparing for a flight than the actual flight.
What sort of feedback have you received from other drone pilots?
A few pilots have approached me in private saying, wow, I never thought about the possibility of hitting an aircraft. I thought about losing my drone. I thought about hitting someone on the ground. I thought about many scenarios, but never occurred to me that someone can come and out of the blue and hit the drone and have an accident. And I think if we have awakened conscience in a few pilots out there to be more careful and to be open to the possibility of flying in the vicinity of other aircraft.
Juan, is there anything that we missed that we should talk about?
We are becoming one industry very rapidly. Crewed and non-crewed aviation have no choice but to be one industry in the future. And this accident is a reflection of that merger, right? We're going to start hitting each other in the air the same way that aircraft with passengers inside have collided in the air in the past. So the fact that now we have a precedent to review that, and the fact that we're all following the same protocol, there is a responsible person for operations under this COA. There is a responsible person for operations under this letter of RVSM. We're all starting to speak the same language because we're going to be operating in the same airspace. And that is key to the success of this merger.
And for my final question, Juan, what message would you like to leave regarding the future of the drone industry?
I would like people to look at the sweet spot. Stop dreaming about things that are decades ahead, like transporting passengers without pilots. Let's focus on the sweet spot today. What can we do with drones today? I'm publishing an article this Friday in Commercial UAV News about the sweet spot for commercial operations, in which I list what are the conditions that are right today for launch a drone business and be profitable. Because the more hours we accumulate, flying hours, the more millions of flying hours that we have to create the foundation for safe operations, the better we are. Let's focus on what we can do today: agricultural spraying, cleaning of solar panels. You see what I mean? Because that will give us the millions of hours of operation that we need to create that foundation.
That's it for episode 427 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Juan Plaza of Plaza Aerospace. I want to thank Juan for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about Plaza Aerospace or want to connect with Juan, check out the webpage at plaza.aero. If you're at this year's Commercial UAV Expo, Juan will be speaking on this topic at one of the sessions. Hope you're able to check it out. If you like the Drone Radio Show, then please subscribe and share. Write a glowing review on iTunes. And if you're able, donate to keep the podcast going. go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.